What if a single shortcut could save ships weeks of travel, reshape global trade, and shift the balance of power across continents? Now imagine this same shortcut costing tens of thousands of lives. This is the story of the Panama Canal, a place where ambition collided with nature, where empires gambled everything and lost, where the line between genius and disaster blurred in the suffocating heat of the jungle. Before it became one of the greatest engineering marvels in human history, this project was a graveyard, not because of war, not because of machinery, but because of something far more invisible and far more deadly. A single bite could mean death. And yet, despite the failure, the death, and the chaos, the dream never died, because whoever controlled this canal wouldn't just control a shortcut, they would control the world's oceans. But this idea, this impossible dream, didn't start here. It began centuries earlier, with explorers who saw something others didn't. Long before machines, before steel, before modern engineering, there was a problem no empire could ignore: two oceans, separated by land. To move goods or armies from the Atlantic to the Pacific, ships had to travel nearly 13,000 kilometers around South America, a journey that was not just long, but deadly. Treacherous storms, unpredictable currents, and one of the most dangerous maritime routes on Earth. So, naturally, empires began to ask a simple question: what if we could cut through instead of going around? As early as the 1500s, Spanish explorers crossing Central America noticed something extraordinary. At its narrowest point, the land between two oceans was only about 80 kilometers wide. 80. On paper, it sounded simple. Cut a path through the land, connect two oceans, and change history forever. But reality was something else entirely. This wasn't flat desert like Egypt's Suez Canal. This was Panama, a land of relentless rain, unstable, and jungles so dense they seemed almost alive. But the idea refused to die, because whoever solved this puzzle wouldn't just save time, they would rewrite the rules of global trade forever. And in the 1800s, one man, fresh off a historic success, believed he was the one who could do it. He was wrong. In 1869, the world witnessed something that felt impossible. The Suez Canal had just been completed, a man-made waterway slicing through Egypt, connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Trade routes that once took months were suddenly reduced to days. At the center of this achievement stood one man, Ferdinand de Lesseps, a diplomat turned engineer, a national hero in France, a man who had just proven that geography itself could be rewritten. So when he announced his next ambition, another canal, this time through Panama, the world didn't hesitate. They trusted him. Investors poured in millions. Engineers joined the mission. Workers from around the world arrived in Central America, believing they were part of the next great miracle of engineering. But Panama was not Egypt. Suez had been flat, dry, and predictable. Panama was the opposite: dense jungle, unstable ground, and relentless rainfall that turned Earth into liquid mud. Mountains had to be cut through, rivers had to be controlled, entire forests had to be removed just to create space for machinery. And yet, there was one major decision that would define everything that followed. De Lesseps insisted on building a sea-level canal, just like Suez. No locks, no steps, no elevation control, just a straight cut through the land. From the beginning, the land resisted. Every excavation filled with water. Every trench collapsed under its own weight. Landslides erased months of progress in seconds. Equipment sank into the ground. Workers struggled not just against the jungle, but against the earth itself. Costs began to rise uncontrollably. Deadlines were missed. Confidence started to fade. But despite all warnings, de Lesseps refused to change course. He believed persistence would overcome nature. It didn't. And while the world watched the project slowly fall apart, something far more dangerous was already spreading through the camps, something no engineer could see. At first, it started like a simple illness, a mild fever, headaches, fatigue that seemed normal after long days of brutal labor in harsh conditions. But within days, the symptoms escalated. Violent chills, high fever, uncontrollable vomiting, internal bleeding, and then death. Diseases like yellow fever and malaria spread through the camps with terrifying speed. Entire work crews collapsed within weeks, and no one understood why it was happening. At the time, medical science had no explanation for how these diseases spread. Many believed it was caused by bad air rising from the swamp. Others blamed contaminated water or the jungle environment itself. So the true source remained invisible, unstoppable, undetected. Mosquitoes. Each bite carried a deadly infection from one human to another. But no one knew. So nothing was done to stop it. The death toll climbed into the thousands. Workers stopped showing up. Panic spread through the camps. Entire teams abandoned their posts. The dream of the canal didn't just slow down, it began to collapse from within. What had begun as one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history was now becoming a mass grave hidden inside the jungle, a symbol of human ambition pushed too far. And as France faced disaster in Panama, the project didn't just fail, it triggered a scandal that would shake an entire nation. By the time reality caught up with ambition, it was already too late. The Panama Canal project, once celebrated as the next great wonder of the world, was collapsing in real time. Progress had stalled, costs had exploded beyond imagination, and thousands of workers had already died. But the disaster in Panama was only half the story. The real collapse was happening in Paris. The company behind the canal had promised returns, progress, and global transformation. Instead, it delivered delays, death, and disappearing money. Investors began to panic, but what they uncovered was even worse than failure. It was deception. To keep the project alive, officials had allegedly hidden the true extent of the financial disaster. Bribes were paid to silence critics, reports were manipulated, political influence was used to keep confidence artificially alive. But secrets don't stay buried forever. When the truth finally emerged, it detonated across France. The fallout became one of the biggest financial scandals in European history. Hundreds of thousands of investors lost their savings. Politicians were exposed. Executives were arrested. Public trust in institutions collapsed almost overnight. The name Panama itself became synonymous with corruption, failure, and betrayal. Ferdinand de Lesseps, once celebrated as a national hero, now stood at the center of disgrace. The man who built Suez had become the face of one of history's greatest engineering failures, and the dream of a canal through Panama, it was abandoned, left to rot in the jungle. But history had not finished with Panama yet, because while France walked away in shame, another power was already watching closely, waiting for its chance to step in. At the turn of the 20th century, a new global power was rising. The United States was expanding its influence, industrially, economically, and militarily. And one problem stood in its way. Global naval movement was still painfully slow. Ships traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific still had to circle the entire continent of South America. A canal in Panama was no longer just an engineering dream, it was a strategic necessity. Then came a man who saw opportunity where others saw failure. President Theodore Roosevelt. To him, the abandoned French project wasn't a warning, it was a prize waiting to be claimed. But there was a problem. Panama was not an independent construction site, it was part of Colombia. So when negotiations stalled, the situation took a dramatic turn. Within months, with indirect US support, Panama declared independence. A new nation was born almost overnight, and almost immediately, it signed a deal. The United States now had full rights to build and control the canal zone, but unlike the French attempt, they would not repeat the same mistakes. They studied everything, every failure, every death, every miscalculation, and they planned something far more precise, far more systematic, far more powerful. This time, the goal was not just ambition, it was control. Control over nature, control over disease, and ultimately, control over global trade itself. But even with political power secured, one final invisible enemy still remained, and defeating it would require a breakthrough no one saw coming. When the United States took control of the Panama Canal project, they didn't just inherit broken machinery and abandoned dreams, they inherited a battlefield. But this time, the enemy wasn't the land. It was something far smaller and far deadlier. For years, workers had been dying from yellow fever and malaria at terrifying rates. But unlike the French attempt, the Americans brought something new to the fight: science. A US Army doctor named William Gorgas led an aggressive, unprecedented campaign. His mission was simple in theory, but nearly impossible in execution: eliminate the mosquito. Every pool of stagnant water was treated or drained, swamps were destroyed, garbage was cleaned, living quarters were redesigned, even the smallest puddle became a target. It was a war of precision against something invisible. For the first time since the project began, the death rate started to fall. Hospitals emptied, fear began to fade. Workers who once saw the jungle as a death sentence could finally breathe again. It was one of the earliest large-scale victories of public health engineering in human history, but with disease under control. The hardest part of the project still remained, the engineering itself, because now they had to solve a problem even nature had made nearly impossible. With disease finally under control, the United States turned its full attention to the original problem. How do you connect two oceans, separated by mountains, rivers, and unstable land? The French had tried one impossible idea: a sea-level canal, and they had failed. So American engineers made a different decision. They changed the rules entirely. Instead of forcing ships through a flat canal, they would lift them and lower them, step by step, through a series of massive water chambers called locks. The concept was simple, but the scale was extraordinary. Ships would enter a chamber filled with water. Gates would close behind them. Then water levels would rise or fall, moving the vessel across different elevations of land, like an elevator for entire ships. But to make this system work, engineers had to create something even more ambitious: a massive artificial lake, Gatun Lake, formed by damming rivers and flooding entire valleys. It was not just construction, it was reshaping geography itself. Every inch had to be calculated. Every lock had to hold thousands of tons of water pressure. One mistake could destroy everything, but piece by piece, it came together. What once seemed impossible began to take form, a system not built to fight nature, but to work with it. And when the first ship finally prepared to enter this engineered pathway, the world was about to witness something that would change global trade forever. On August 15th, 1914, something extraordinary happened. After centuries of failed attempts, political upheaval, engineering disasters, and unimaginable loss, the Panama Canal was finally complete. A single ship prepared to make history. As it entered the first lock chamber, massive steel gates closed behind it with a heavy echo. Then the water began to rise, slowly, powerfully, precisely. The vessel lifted like it was floating between worlds. For the first time in human history, a ship was traveling between two oceans through a controlled inland water system. No longer was South America a barrier. No longer were weeks of dangerous travel necessary. The world had shrunk. What once took over a month now took hours. The impact was immediate. Global trade accelerated. Naval strategy changed overnight. Economies adjusted to a faster, more connected world. And at the center of it all was a narrow, man-made corridor through Panama. The canal was more than just an engineering achievement. It was proof that humanity could reshape the planet itself. But it came at a cost few would ever forget. More than a century has passed since the Panama Canal first opened, and yet it remains one of the most important arteries of global trade. Every year, thousands of ships still pass through its locks, carrying everything from oil to food to electronics that power modern life. Over time, the canal has been expanded and modernized to handle even larger ships. But today, a new set of challenges is emerging. The same environment that once made construction so difficult is now threatening its future. Water levels are becoming less predictable, droughts are limiting operations, and global climate change is putting pressure on the canal's most essential resource, fresh water. At the same time, global trade itself is evolving. New shipping routes are emerging, technology is advancing, and the world is no longer dependent on a single passage between oceans. So the question now is no longer how the canal was built, but how long it can remain essential, because even the greatest engineering marvels in history are not immune to change. The Panama Canal once proved that humanity could conquer nature, but now nature may be quietly rewriting the rules once again. So, what do you think? Was this one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history, or a warning of how far humans can push nature? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to explore more incredible stories like this, stories that change the way you see the world, subscribe to Nova World, because the next story might be even more unbelievable.